Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna, today we are reading Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 25, The Glories of Devotional Service, text 31 and 32. So on the board is 32, so I'll just read out 31 first. Maitreya Vacha, we recite 32, I just read 31 now. Viditvatam kapilumatu. So how is that in Viditvatam kapilumatu chata snehuyatra tanva vichata tatvamnayam yad pravadanti sankyam pravachavai bhakti vitana yogam. Translation. Sri Maitreya said, after hearing the statement of his mother, Kapila could understand her purpose, and he became compassionate towards her because of being born of her body. He described the Sankhya system of philosophy, which is a combination of devotional service and mystic realization, as received by disciplic succession. So now we can recite text 32. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Devanam Gunalinganam Devanam Gunalinganam Anushravika Karmanam Anushravika Karmanam Sattva Manaso Sattva Manaso Vrittisvabhavikituya Vrittisvabhavikituya Animita Bhagavati Animita Bhagavati Bhakti Siddhir Gariyasi Bhakti Siddhir Kariyasi. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Devanam Gunalinganam Anushravika Karmanam Sattva Evaika Manaso Vrittisvabhavikituya Animita Bhagavati Animita Bhagavati. Oh, sorry. Bhakti Siddhya Gariyasi. Devanam Gunalinganam Shravika Karmana Vrittisvabhavikituya Siddhir Kariyasi. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Devanam Gunalinganam Anushravika Karmanam Sattva Evaika Manaso Vikituya Nimita Bhagavati Bhakti Siddhya Gariyasi. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Devanam Gunalinganam Anushravika Karmanam Svavaika Manaso Vritisva Bhaviketaya Vriti Kirtire Karishyasi. Okay, word to word, Shri Bhagavan Vacha. Oh, sorry, Mataji. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Devanam Gunalinganam Anushmadataranmanam Savaivaka Manasa Tisavaviketaya Animita Bhagavati Bhakti Siddhayasi. Okay, word to word, Shri Bhagavan Vacha. Supreme Personality of Godhead said, Devanam, of the senses or of the presiding deities of the senses. Gunalinganam, which detect sense objects. Anushravika, according to scripture. Karmanam, which work. Sattve, unto the mind or unto the Lord. Eva, only. Eka manasaha, of a man of undivided mind. Vrittihi, inclination. Svabhaviki, natural. To, in fact. Ya, which. Animita, without motive. Bhagavati, to the personality of Godhead. Bhakti, devotional service. Siddhi, then salvation. Kariyasi, better. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace of Acharya Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Lord Kapila said, the senses are symbolic representations of the demigods, and their natural inclination is to work under the direction of the Vedic injunctions. As the senses are representatives of the demigods, so the mind is the representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The mind's natural duty is to serve. When that service spirit is engaged in devotional service to the Personality of Godhead without any motive, that is far better even than salvation. Purport. The senses of the living entity are always engaged in some occupation, either in activities prescribed in the injunctions of the Vedas or in material activities. The natural inclination of the senses is to work for something, and the mind is the center of the senses. The mind is actually the leader of the senses, therefore it is called sattva. Similarly, the leader of all the demigods who are engaged in the activities of this material world, the sun god, moon god, Indra and others, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is stated in the Vedic literature that the demigods are different limbs of the universal body of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Our senses are also controlled by different demigods. Our senses are representations of various demigods, and the mind is the representation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The senses, led by the mind, act under the influence of the demigods. When the service is ultimately aimed at the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the senses are in their natural possession. The Lord is called Rishikesha, for He is actually the proprietor and ultimate master of the senses. The senses and the mind are naturally inclined to work, but when they are materially contaminated, they work for some material benefit, or for the service of the demigods, although actually they are meant to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The senses are called Rishika, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is called Rishikesha. Indirectly, all the senses are naturally inclined to serve the Supreme Lord. That is called Bhakti. Kapila said that when the senses, without desire for material profit or selfish motives, are engaged in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one is situated in devotional service. That spirit of service is far better than siddhi, salvation. Bhakti, the inclination to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is in a transcendental position far better than mukti or liberation. Thus, bhakti is the stage of after liberation. Unless one is liberated, one cannot engage the senses in the service of the Lord. When the senses are engaged either in material activities of sense gratification or in the activities of the Vedic injunctions, there is some motive. But when the same senses are engaged in the service of the Lord, and there is no motive, that is called animitta, and is the natural inclination of the mind. The conclusion is that when the mind, without being deviated either by Vedic injunctions or by material activities, is fully engaged in Krishna consciousness or devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it is far better than the most aspired for liberation from material entanglement. Om Gyanatim Randasya Granjana Shadakya Chakshuran Militam Yena Tasma Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamayam Darate Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uta Parakamalam Shri Guran Vaishnavamshcha Shri Rupam Sagrachatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sachivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parichana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Dalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamshcha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandha Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gorange Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhana Sutere Pranamami Hari Priya Vancha Kalpadarupescha Kripa Sindhya Bhaevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Thank you everyone for coming. We're in a very glorious chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, as the title says, the glories of devotional service. We're right at the beginning of Lord Kapiladev's famous instructions to Mother Devahuti. Actually, right in the verse today we're reading. Lord Kapiladev spoke before also, right? But so yes, in yesterday's verse, Mother Devahuti was again, as previously already, presenting herself in a very humble mood, as being actually not qualified, not having the intelligence to understand the Supreme Lord, to understand devotional service, and but as we know, that mood is actually the very qualification that we can begin to understand the Lord, because it's bhakti is not a process of exercising our material intelligence, but it is a process in which we try our everything simply to somehow or other please the Supreme Lord, so that He will be pleased to reveal Himself to us. And reveal Himself to us means not only to understand the tattva in terms of, He is the Supreme Lord, everything is the Summum Bonum, everything comes from Him, but also about the process of devotional service, Bhakti Yoga, because to actually understand Him more and more deeply, and to thus realize ourselves as well as Him in our eternal perfection, as we are as His eternal servants, as spirit souls. That only happens when we are fully engaged in pure devotional service. As Kapiladev today points out, especially in how actually all our mind and senses are meant to be engaged in His service, and being thus engaged without any motive, that is greater even than liberation, which itself is extremely high goal, especially looked at from today's age, where, in today's verse, it's also interesting, Lord Kapiladev says that actually the senses are symbolic representations of the demigods, and their natural inclination is to work under the direction of the Vedic injunctions. So, as we know in previous ages, people in general would be engaged in under the protection or the organization of the Varnashrama system, where everyone, even the lower caste, they would, even though at a lower level, so according to their Varna, their ashram, but still everyone would basically follow the rules and regulations as laid out in the Vedas. And in this way, everyone would be inclined to work in that way. But we know nowadays, obviously, that in Kali Yuga, no one is inclined actually to work under the direction of Vedic injunctions. We are just inclined to fully act whimsically, however, at whatever moment, what our mind and senses seem to please. Sorry, how did I come to that? I lost it. Yeah, but before that I said it because of something. Anyway, so Lord Kapila is saying that, that it's greater than, that liberation itself is such a great goal. Because, nowadays almost no one even thinks about it, what to speak of actually having some proper knowledge or the determination to do such kind of austerities, to even aspire for impersonal liberation, for becoming freed from the miseries of material existence and ultimately merge into the Lord's effulgence, the Brahmajyoti. Even in terms of the Brahmajyoti, recently my Guru Maharaj, His Holiness the Amrita Swami Maharaj, spoke about the Brahmajyoti when he was in Vrindavan, because generally we rather condemn the Brahmajyoti as devotees because we speak in that context that a devotee should never aspire to just for liberation, to merge, just becoming free from miseries, but especially because in that situation we practically give up our individuality. Of course, we can never fully give it up, because as spirit souls that ultimately we are, we have that spiritual body, and eventually we will engage in our relationship with Krishna in the spiritual world. But for the time while someone is merged in the Brahmajyoti, you're not aware at all of your individuality and of the Lord's personality. You're just blissful in the state of, yes, no misery, I just exist in this amazing effulgence. So it's just realization of Sat, of existence. Yes, I exist. Just briefly, so my Guru Maharaj was explaining there, reading from Chaitanya Charitamrita, where Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami builds up in the Adi Lila in the beginning, the whole Siddhanta, the philosophy of how, before talking then about the appearance of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, where he explains how he is Krishna, he is the Supreme Lord, and part of understanding that is also understanding his effulgence, the Brahmajyoti. And even that, Guru Maharaj was telling from Brihad Bhagavatamrita of Sanatana Goswami, how actually when Gopakumara at one point is told to go to the Brahmajyoti when he was in Satyaloka, by the Mahapurush there, told him to do some more sadhana and then visit that place of impersonal liberation. What's it called? The Mahakalapura, of the great eternal time, the place. But the interesting part is that even there, actually, the Supreme Lord is there as a personality, as Mahakala, but generally no one is able to see his personality, because they don't have the qualification. All they see is his effulgence. Gopakumar, when he came there, because he's qualified, he could see his personality sometimes, but then of course, because that's the nature of the place and that's what the Lord wanted him to experience. He also mostly got covered over with the effulgence of the Lord. And he also felt how he was pulled to merge into there. Because that's the nature of that place. So anyway, just a side point. So now coming back to Lord Kapiladev's telling about how the senses and the mind are naturally inclined to work. Like Prabhupada in the first purport, he explains how the center of all the senses is the mind. And so the mind is actually the leader of the senses, and that's why it's called sattva. We know sattva also means existence, or sattva gun, mode of goodness also. But that also correlates because mode of goodness, as we know, is for maintenance, whereas mode of passion is for creation and mode of ignorance for destruction. So, and like we hear also, then later on here also from Lord Kapiladev explained the process of creation, and even previously we heard in Bhagavatam, how the mind is created from the mode of goodness. Because it is the material mind is the main instrument of force which, because of its association with the false ego, of keeping us in the material world, of maintaining our material existence. Because ultimately, as we know, we are spirit souls, we are not meant to be here. But as Prabhupada concludes in the purport, that, or somewhere he says it, that we are actually, ultimately, we are inclined to serve the Supreme Lord. But being in association with the modes of nature, under the influence of the false ego, we become inclined to serve instead our material senses, exploit the Lord's external energy. But yeah, so in terms of our being the senses and mind being inclined to work, but when being contaminated, then we work for material benefit, as the Lord says here. I remember there's in the Brahma Vimohan Lila, when I read it a couple of months ago, or maybe 3 months ago or so, actually Lord Brahma's prayers, we know there's some very famous verses which perhaps most or many devotees know, such as Tatyanu Kampam Susamikshimano, or Samashritaya Padapalava Plavam is actually not by him, but it's also in the chapter by Shukadeva Goswami. But yeah, there's like Lord Brahma's prayers there I found really amazing, like so many verses actually there. I felt I would, if I get the time, I would like to memorize. So yeah, just one small verse of those verses of these is where Lord Brahma actually nicely explains, how do you say, figuratively, or yeah, in a quite striking way of what happens when we don't take the opportunity of human life to use our high intelligence to control the mind and senses and engage them in the service of the Lord. But if we just let, as you would say, just be in the moment, just let it flow as it comes. So if you just agree to be Godas, to just be servants of our mind and senses, then so let me first tell the verse. So Lord Brahma says, Tavat, so how does it say? Tavat ragadayas tenas, tavat kara griham griham, tavan mohangri nigaro, yavat Krishna natechana. Well, Lord Brahma says that actually, as materialists, our very home is kara griham, is actually like a prison. Why? Because tavad, why is what it says in the last line, yavat Krishna natechana, that as long as the people are not your people, Krishna, in other words, as long as someone doesn't become your devotee, then his very home is actually just like a prison. But not just a prison, but within that prison, within your home, then you're wearing a foot shackle. Tavan moho angre nigado. As that your material affection for other people are just like foot shackles. Actually, tavat kara grihangre. Yeah, so your home is like a prison. Your affection is like a foot shackle, and then, but further on, not only are you in a prison, shackled, bound by your feet as well, but tavat ragadayastinas, all your material attachments, your material desires, they just act like thieves. As we see here. And why is that? Because our mind and sense is actually meant to please the Supreme Lord by engaging in His service, and thus so that we get the highest pleasure by being in direct enjoyed, by being enjoyed by the Supreme Lord, but because instead we allow them to be engaged in all other kind of different material activities. So they just act like thieves. And then in contrast to that, Lord Brahma in another verse, he points out the great fortune because we know the pastime was that Lord Brahma wanted to test Krishna by stealing the cowherd boys as they were having a picnic, and then Krishna himself expanded personally into every single one of those innumerable cowherd boys and calves which were stolen. And and then obviously eventually Lord Brahma, after one moment of his time when he came back, he saw that, which was like almost a year in earthly Vrindavan, and then he was amazed and fully surrendering, offering all those prayers. And so in one verse where he appreciates, glorifies the great fortune of the cowherd women and the cows, because they were. Anyway, I'll tell the verse first, and we'll can understand. So Lord Brahma says, "Aho titanya vrachakoramanya stanyam ritam pitam ativate muda yasam vipovat sataratmachatmana yatriptayat Dhyapina chalamadvara." Lord Brahma says, "Aho tidanya." Oh, how greatly fortunate are these Vrajagoramanyaha, these cows and cowherd ladies of Vrindavan. Why? Because stanyamritam, the nectar from their breast milk, or in the case of the cows, from their other milk, stanyamritam pitam ativate muda. That nectarian milk was drunk by you, O my Lord, and ativa temuda, with great pleasure, to your great satisfaction, to your complete satisfaction. It was not that you just were thinking, okay, I give them a favor to please them, I accept the milk. No, it was your greatest pleasure in the form. And how? Vatsataratmachatmana, in the form of, because you personally took the form of their cowherd boys and the calves. And then in the last line he contrasts that to yatriptarye adhyapi, that kind of satisfaction even up to today, nachalam was not sufficient, was not reached by nachalam advara, by the performance of all the Vedic sacrifices, or in other words, all the Vedic sacrifices that have since time immemorial been performed until now, could not give you any such kind of satisfaction as you took simply from taking the forms of the calves and the cowherd boys and drinking the milk of the mothers and of their mothers. So Lord Brahma shows there how the contrast, how greatly fortunate those pure devotees are who are ready to engage their mind and senses fully for the pleasure of the Lord. Then even the Lord himself takes such great pleasure that he might even personally, in that case, appear as your son or your calf. And yeah, further on, in terms of how actually everyone, even whether in material life or in spiritual life, the inclination to work is there, but then to work for what is the question. That's also, Srila Prabhupada discusses that very nicely in the preface of Nectar of Devotion, where he explains, actually perhaps I'll read a few parts of that, where he explains very nicely how it is that, or how to understand the contrast of how it is that so many, the people in general, like one thing which bewildered me even before becoming a devotee, that like how can it be, what to speak of then after becoming devotee, how can it be that people in general are so foolishly engaged in so many material activities which don't satisfy themselves, and on the contrary, which destroy the whole world, the environment, and so much violence and misery caused by our material activities. Which, that used to bewilder me even before coming across devotees. And then when you start becoming a devotee, then obviously you even feel more, oh wow, that's so amazing. How can it be that someone is in material life? But one angle to understand it is very nicely explained by Srila Prabhupada here in Nectar of Devotion, the preface, where he explains that actually the reason for anyone to perform any activity is always some rasa, is always some mellow, some taste that we derive from it. So Prabhupada says there that every service has some attractive feature which drives the servitor progressively on and on. Every one of us within this world is perpetually engaged in some sort of service, and the impetus for such service is the pleasure we derive from it. So, and then he goes on to explain how that in the material world is at different levels, like it can be just on a fully selfish level of just identifying yourself with the body and thinking whatever pleases my senses directly, or others who are a bit more elevated, who think, okay, there's also like philanthropists and so on, who think for others also, no, we all should be happy, and so on. But there's always some rasa that you derive from it, but like Prabhupada says, but the relish or taste of the mundane rasa does not long endure, and therefore mundane workers are always apt to change their position of enjoyment. So, because that is one thing we see in material life, that you can never actually stick to just doing one thing. And generally, how Maya cheats us is that she tells us, that's it's cool to do many different things. I want to do new things. That's being a progressive person, to always wanting to learn new things, wanting to experience new things. But what she doesn't allow us to realize as conditioned souls is that itself indicates that actually we are never satisfied with what we are doing. But that's not what she allows us to see. Rather we think, oh, no, there's so much more to experience in this material world, there's so much more to learn, so much more to do. So let's do it. But actually, as Prabhupada explains here, the very reason is only that because the relish or taste of the mundane rasa does not long endure, and therefore mundane workers are always apt to change their position of enjoyment. And he explains that this process of bogatyag is always going on, that in material life, that's why at one point you're fed up with doing something, you give it up, or in general your whole attitude towards material life is that, oh, it's just useless, I just don't want to get out of this material world. But if you don't come to a deep realization, to really go for Vairagya, in a determined way to renounce everything, then it's just tyag, just a phase that I'm fed up now, I don't want to do anything, and then you don't get a higher taste, and you anyway look again for some sense of gratification. And Prabhupada said that because sense gratification does not endure for long, it is therefore called chapala sukha, or flickering happiness. And in contrast to that, obviously, bhakti rasa is exists eternally, and it actually, in fact, we know it eternally increases. That we know the spiritual world, it's not static, it's a dynamic world, dynamic existence of everyone and everything. That it's Krishna's energies are just ever expanding, and our relationship with him, on the one hand, it's generally fixed in terms of the rasa, but then on the other hand, it's also dynamic of how in detail we are interacting and what the pleasure he's deriving from us and we indirectly derive from serving him. And so because it is eternal, that kind of rasa, the bhakti rasa, it is called amrita, Prabhupada says, which does not die but exists eternally. And Lord Kapila here in the does he use the word? No, sorry, I don't think so. But Prabhupada in the purport explains how the Lord is called Rishikesha, the master of the senses. And as we know from the famous verse that Sarvapadi Vinirmuktam Tatparatvina Nirmalam Rishikena Rishikesha Sevanam Bhaktirochyate. That bhakti yoga is that when our senses are engaged in the service of the Lord, and thus we become free from all material designations and our senses become purified. And in fact, we can see that Madhadeva Huti has this kind of understanding even before the instructions here of Lord Kapila. And not just theoretically understanding, she had realized it. Because in one famous verse early on, Madhadeva Huti was exclaiming, Nirvinna nitaram bhoman asatindriya tarshanat yena sambhav. How's it? Yena sambhav. I forgot the exact third line. But Madhadeva Huti is exclaimed there that Nirvinna nitaram, that I'm completely disgusted with Bhuman, O Lord. With what? With asat indriya tarshanat. With my asat indriya, with my material senses, simply being always agitating me. And from that, yena sambhavyamanina, I think. And being born out of that is prapannandam tama Prabhu, is that I'm being pushed to fall into the darkest, the abyss of ignorance, andha tama. And so Madhadeva Huti, she understood that actually my senses, they're not meant to be engaged in these material activities. That very engagement simply causes me suffering and causes me ignorance, blinds me. So that was how she approached Lord Kapila and why she approached Lord Kapila for spiritual instructions. And then the later part of the Prabhupada focuses on how Lord Kapila concludes also with Bhakti Siddhya Gariyasi, that this bhakti, this devotional service, the process of engaging our senses for the pleasure of the Lord, is even better than so-called siddhi, or ordinary perfection, or liberation, in other words. There's, again, in Nectar of Devotion that is discussed quite elaborately in the beginning chapters, because actually Srila Rupa Goswami, and as we know, Nectar of Devotion is Prabhupada's summary study of that, where he explains that of bhakti we can see there's 6 features of which devotional service has in one sense. And so he explains, first of all, when you begin to engage in devotional service, it frees you from all kinds of sinful reactions. Secondly, it is the process which is the actual beneficial activity. It brings all auspiciousness. Thirdly, so sinful actions. Yeah, it gives you transcendental happiness. It gives you a kind of happiness which nothing else can give you. Similarly, correlating with that is also that it derides even liberation, which, in other words, again, you can also be expressed as that the happiness you experience in Bhakti Yoga is far greater than the happiness you get by simply being merged in the Brahmajyoti. And yeah, the last point is that it is so powerful that it even attracts Krishna. There, one I'm missing, 6. And anyway, and where it is discussed of how it derides even liberation, there's many examples are given. One of them is Vitrasura from the 6th canto, who was actually Chitraketu Maharaj in his previous life, being cursed by Mother Parvati to take birth as a demon. But even in the amazing thing we see that he took birth as such a ferocious demon, where the demigods had to pray to the Lord to help them, and then the Lord had to give Indra give indirectly through instructing them how to get it, the Vajra, the thunderbolt weapon, with which he then eventually killed Vitrasura. But it's an amazing pastime how actually Indra was so scared at one point that he didn't even didn't have the courage to use the weapon, and Vitrasura himself had to encourage him. And he did amazing preaching there even though in the form of a demon. But yeah, there we see also in the prayers he said to the Lord that he doesn't want anything else other than devotional service, which includes he doesn't want any material benefits and neither liberation. And that's quite impressive if you think how even being in such a body of a demon, still a pure devotee, he doesn't care. Whatever situation, all he wants is somehow or other being able to remember and serve the Lord. And also another beautiful example given there is that of the Nagapatnis, the wives of the ritualistic brahmanas, which we hear of in 10th canto, where Krishna, with his cowherd boys, one day doesn't take, as usual, their lunch boxes with them when they go in the forest, but then at one point, so the cowherd boys tell Krishna that, oh, we're so hungry, even though themselves they are not hungry, but on always thinking for Krishna's pleasure, they think Krishna must be hungry now, so on pretext of that, they exclaim that they are hungry, and so then Krishna tells them, go there to those brahmanas, and they're absorbed in the Vedic sacrifice, they ignore them, and then he tells them, go to the wives of the brahmanas, and they very eagerly, being pure devotees, run out and offer everything to the Lord. And so, sorry, I got this in the wrong direction. I said, now I was telling about Dvijapatnis, actually. I wanted to tell about the Nagapatnis. Sorry. So, obviously the Dvijapatnis also very beautifully show how pure devotees don't care for anything, not even risking them being rejected by their husbands, and where we see that the husbands were then, even after realizing when they came back, actually they realized that their wives were extremely exalted souls, pure devotees, that at that time they accepted them as their spiritual masters, not as their wives, as their property. They realized, they are much greater than us. We are just stuck here in our ritualistic karma kanda activities, not realizing when the Supreme Lord personally comes here. So they realized that, and they condemned themselves. They said, to hell with all our knowledge and all our so-called qualifications and everything. But still they couldn't actually then, even though they had a strong desire to go to Krishna and surrender at his lotus feet, still eventually they discussed for a long time all together how should we do it, how should we do it, but then at the end their fear of Kamsa was too strong that they then concluded, no, actually we can't do it, because if Kamsa comes to know that, then he will kill us. Whereas for pure devotees, the Dvijapatnis, they never even thought about anything like that. So, but now coming what I wanted to tell about the Nagapatnis. So they also, when after the pastime, when Krishna dances on Kaliya's hood, then when the Nagapatnis see how their husband eventually surrendered to the Lord, gave up his envious nature, attitude, then they pray on his behalf. And they glorify the Lord, that the dust of your lotus feet is so great. If a person somehow or other achieves that dust, then he doesn't care for anything else. He doesn't care for any material prosperity, not for mystic perfections or liberation or anything. And then actually in a beautiful verse they exclaim their amazement of, how it can be that you gave that extreme rare mercy unto our envious demoniac husband. So they tell Kasyana Bhavo Sinadeva Vitmahe Tavangririno Sparasharikara Yad Vanchaya Shriya Dalanacharatapa Vihayakaman Suchiram Dritavrata. To tell that, oh my Lord, we do not understand how this envious serpent got this great mercy, how he, like Tavadika, Adhikar, Adhikar means qualification. We classify the devotees as Kanishtadhikari, Madhyamakari, Uttamadhikari. So how did he have, what kind of adhikar did he have that he got this great fortune of Tavangri Rino, that the dust of your lotus feet has touched him, and on his head. And because that kind dust of your lotus feet, that is even Yadvanchaya Shriya, it's even desired by the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi Devi, Lalana, who is the most beautiful, the most exalted woman in the world. Lalanacharat Tapo, who performed severe austerities for the sake of getting that dust. Not only that, leaving aside all desires, Vihaya Kaman, she Suchiram for a very long time. She took executed vows Tritavrata with great determination. So that is the great fortune that devotees get by coming in contact with the Lord's devotees and with the Lord Himself. And then it is a great mercy to actually, if we come to that stage where we have this full inner determination that I don't care for anything else other than somehow or other being able to be engaged in the Lord's service. Like just this morning I heard a few minutes of Prabhupada's lecture. In Kuntimano's prayers he was telling that it's amazing how Prabhupada many times in such simple words but being able to convey such deep messages and so sweet. So Prabhupada was saying something like that. So we just need to again join Krishna's family. And then Prabhupada relating now to Nectar of Devotion, about how we always go, any activity we do is for some rasa. And Prabhupada there in very simple terms said that, and when we come back to Krishna's family, we can do that in whatever way we like. So in other words, Krishna, he allows us to, it's not imposed upon us, it's he allows us to engage in whatever rasa in his devotional service. So I'll conclude here over time. So thank you for your attention. If any quick question or comment? Yes, Prabhu. No, that's how it actually is. As you know, Prabhupada would many times quote Bhagavad Gita, Brahmabhuta prasannatmana shochadina kankshade samasarvisha bhutashi matbhaktim labhate param. That actually only Krishna says when you reach Brahmabhuta, the stage of liberation, of not caring for any material considerations, then you're qualified to receive devotional service. But that's how it is. But then we know the special mercy is there of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who, knowing our fallen position, who first gives us some taste, gives us some drop of love of Godhead, and with that then inspires us to begin engaging in devotional service and then gradually become purified. I mean, even otherwise, Vaidhi Bhakti is there. By the mercy of devotees, we can start engaging in devotional service, but obviously, and yeah, like I was wondering about it also, especially in the beginning this, and asked devotees sometimes, like one time, yeah, better perhaps don't say it, but yeah, one answer I got is that, I think in terms of understanding, okay, actually when you engage in bhakti, you're beyond liberation, but then we feel like, yeah, we are influenced by material things. So the explanation is that, yes, bhakti is transcendental, but then, like Kapila Dev later will explain also, but still the performer can brings in his contamination, and so he can perform bhakti within the modes also. And it's like you have the ticket for liberation, you have the platform is there, but we choose from our side that we don't want to act on that platform. But yeah, kind of like that. Yeah, obviously that's. Yeah, I mean that's when you perform mystic yoga, then yeah, you get some of those cities and eventually all the ashra cities. Right. Okay. Yes, bro. So, what about 31? No, I read it at the beginning. Yeah. Yes, bro, you had a question?
Yeah, you said that material affection for other people is like having a foot shut.
Yes, bro.
Is there any ramifications for affection for devotees, for pure devotees?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as that description of Lord Brahma was like for Griha Medis, simply for materialists who don't engage the senses in the service of the Lord. Then it's those material affection and material desires. That's how it acts. Obviously, for devotees, it's different. That if whatever relationship, if it somehow or other helps you to engage in devotional service, then it's good. And if it's simply purely based on material considerations, then it's binding you. Yeah,